Hello, I'm Bob Cialdini, a behavioral scientist and author of the book Influence, as well as the new book Pre-Suasion. And I'd like to tell you about a series of video interviews I've conducted with individuals who I admire and who have written about behavioral science not just for the academic community, but as well for the larger community. Individuals such as Dan Ariely, Adam Grant, Amy Cuddy, and Richard Thaler. In this series of interviews called Cialdini Asks, I try to get beneath the surface and behind the scenes, inquiring into the motivations that spurred the work of these individuals and their decisions to write about it for a popular audience. I also asked them about aspects of their work that exceeded their expectations in terms of impact, as well as those aspects of their work they felt have been most underappreciated. I even asked them to tell us a funny story or revealing one that nobody knows about them and their work. I know that in the process, I have been surprised, fascinated, and informed by their answers. I hope that the same will be true for you. So I do hope that you will look out for and tune in to the Cialdini Asks video series as we make it available online over the next several weeks. Thanks. Welcome everyone to today's installment of the Cialdini Asks interview series. My guest today is Professor Richard Thaler of the University of Chicago, widely recognized as one of the founding figures of the tremendously influential field of behavioral economics. Hello, Richard.
Hi, Bob. Great to see you.
You as well. I'm a big fan of your work.
Thank
And
you
that
very much.
includes, of course, your concept of nudges, practices that influence people in directions that stand to enhance their lives. But I was especially taken with your recent book, Misbehaving, which describes the beginnings of behavioral economics. Can you tell us what led to your decision to write that book? That is, what were the factors that nudged you to decide that the time was right for this account in this form, that is, as a popular book?
Well, let me answer that in two parts. First, why I decided it was time to write another book after Nudge, and then why I chose to write it the way I did. The first explanation of how I came to write another book comes from my literary agent, a notorious figure in the literary world, John Brockman, who's the agent to many academics turned authors, including Danny Kahneman and Dan Gilbert and many others.
Yes.
So John has several what you would call pre-suasion techniques that he uses to nudge authors into writing a book. And I got to know John through Danny and Dan Gilbert. And sometime after Nudge came out, John started his routine. And the first step of the routine is flattery. So he tells you that, you're a great man and the world needs to hear from you.
Yeah.
Now, I should say, John's normal manner is a kind way to put it would be gruff. And so all this flattery is a contrast to what you're used to. Oh, that book, piece of crap. Oh, that, So, you have this curmudgeon who's telling you how great you are and how the world needs you to write a book. And I'm telling him, look, John, that last book was a lot of work. I don't even have time to think about what I would write a book about, much less write a book. So then he uses the Cialdini master trick of the foot in the door.
Uh-huh.
So he says, look, so I said, look, I don't have time to write a book proposal. He says, no, don't worry about a book proposal. Just write me a letter. Just send me a 2-page letter on what you might write a book about. So he keeps pestering me about this. And finally, really just to get rid of him, I send him a 2-page letter about an idea, a glimmer of an idea I had for a book, the title of which was Snags. And the idea was, I kind of thought of it as a prequel to Nudge. Here are the things we trip on, for which we could use help.
Yeah.
But I wrote up a couple pages with some examples and sent it to him, and figured that would be that. It would be the last I would hear of that. The next thing I knew, there was a book auction going on. John, wait, what is this auction? And, then somebody's waving some amount of money in front of me to write a book about which I've thought very little and have written 2 pages. So then how did Snags turn into Misbehaving?
Right.
I worked on Snags off and on for 2 years. As I said, I was busy, but I had a research assistant work for me full-time 2 summers, investigating various snags and their origins and how we got into this. And so I had sort of this pile of stuff. And it just didn't work. And what I realized is that what made Nudge work was 2 organizing principles. One was the idea of libertarian paternalism.
Right.
That you could help people without forcing them to do anything. And the other was choice architecture. That by creating the environment in which people choose, you can help them navigate better. I think of GPS as the ultimate nudge. So I had those 2 organizing principles, and I had Cass Sunstein, who can write 100 pages a day. And, so that made book writing easy.
Yeah.
This book just it was like a collection of things that, so I was getting frustrated. I was ready to send the money back. And then I decided, all right, what I'm going to do is just write a few chapters that are fun for me to write and see what happens. So there's a chapter in that book, my favorite chapter in the book, is the story of how faculty members at the Chicago Booth School of Business chose offices in our new building. You can see my office here in the background. And, spoiler alert, mayhem ensued. Now, that was a lot of fun to write that chapter. I got to make fun of my colleagues.
It was
And-
fun to read it, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, every academic can relate to that. Now, I mean, that chapter actually fit into Snags, right? It was.
Yeah.
So I thought I was still writing Snags, and the next chapter in the book, which goes with it, is a chapter about the NFL draft and some research I had done showing that teams put way too high a value on picking early in the draft.
Right.
And this is something I had continued to work on. I was working with some NFL teams. So that was fun.
Yeah.
And I wrote up a few more of these. And I showed them to Michael Lewis, the author of Moneyball, and recently has written a book about Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky.
Terrific book.
Terrific book, yeah. So I've become friends with Michael over the years, partly helping him with the research on that book.
Oh.
So I sent him this bundle of chapters and said, how much of a book could be like this? And he said, all. And he encouraged me to make the structure of the book not exactly autobiographical, but chronological. Now, this is my publisher. Let's just say the publisher was not completely enthusiastic about this, and the reason is that it's the book ends up being in a non-existent niche because it's 1/3 memoir,
Yes.
1/3 history of a field,
Right.
and 1/3 primer of that field,
Right.
with lots of stories.
Right.
The model I had in my head was if Feynman had written Surely You Must Be Joking, Mr. Feynman, one of my favorite books of all time. If that book had included physics, that's the book I wanted to write. Now, I kept asking, is there any book like that? No. So my publisher told me we're not allowed to mention the word memoir anywhere when we talk about this book, because people don't buy memoirs of obscure academics, or even academics like us that are not quite obscure, but we're not movie stars, and we're not superstar athletes, right? They don't, and so the book, it's not like that book is about my life. It's more kind of me as a spectator and somewhat of a participant in something that interesting that was happening. Anyway, as you know, I start the book by telling this story about Danny Kahneman getting a phone call. I'm sitting in his living room. He gets a phone call from a reporter who's writing a story about me. This is about 15 years ago. And Danny says, "Oh, this is embarrassing," he says to me, because I'm just sitting in Danny's living room and we're schmoozing as we always do. He says, "Oh, I forgot. I have this phone call from this reporter. He wants me to talk about you." And I don't know I don't know, maybe you should leave. I said I could go to, another room. He said, no, you can stay. Maybe it'll be amusing. So I'm sitting there in his living room, and he's talking to the reporter. And at one point I hear him saying, the best thing about Thaler, what really makes him special, is that he's lazy. And Danny this is my best friend, right? And he's telling me that my outstanding attribute is my laziness. So I'm, I can't say anything, right? I'm bound to silence, but I'm waving at him, and and to this day he insists that this is a compliment. He has to do a little dancing to insist on that, but he says that my laziness means that I only work on things that are interesting and important. Now, I think there's a better way of phrasing that. But Dan is wise in all matters. So I wrote this book because I'm lazy. So I only wrote chapters that were amusing for me to write. And if it wasn't amusing, I left it out.
Fascinating. Great story. Let's talk about the flip side of that question. Of all your work, what has most surprised you in terms of its big impact? What has had oversized effect relative to your expectations for it?
Well, that would have to be the book Nudge.
No.
Now, I told the story of misbehaving. We set out to write Nudge. We didn't have a title. Our working title was Libertarian Paternalism is Not an Oxymoron. And publishers thought we might sell tens of copies.
Yeah.
If we had big families. So, we knew that wasn't going to be the title, but we didn't have we figured we'd think of the title later. I didn't, as you know, previously I told you that misbehaving used to be Snags. So it's not like we didn't realize we needed a title. But anyway, that book proposal, maybe partly because of the absence of the title, landed with a thud. No one wanted it.
Really?
No one wanted it. We ended up publishing it with an academic press. They did want it, but they were used to selling tens of copies.
Yeah.
So they didn't know how to market it. So no one expected anything from that book, including us. And it's sold nearly 1 million copies now.
Right.
And more importantly, it led to the introduction of behavioral science into public policy making.
Right.
Through a series of happenstances. So when David Cameron was the chair of the Conservative Party in the UK and preparing to run for election, he had a group of young people surrounding him, one of whom bought a copy of Nudge and thought this is something that the Tories could use. And he bought a pile of them and left them as a nudge in the little offices where they used to hang out. And David Cameron picked one up and read it. And he said, oh yeah, maybe we could use this. And then when the election came, their elections, God can, we could learn something. Their elections take about 2 months.
Right.
And uh, where this one felt like 2 decades for us. But they have something they call a manifesto. It's kind of equivalent to our platforms. And in their manifesto, they said, if elected, we're going to use behavioral science to help inform public policy. So, I know how unimportant party platforms are in the U.S., so I thought nothing of this.
Right.
But a couple of weeks after the election, I get a call. Okay, we're doing this thing. How do we do it? And I flew over to London, and they were lucky enough to have just the perfect guy to start this team, David Halpern.
Yeah.
And they had about 5 people and started doing things. And a few of them worked. And there was great, I should say, the initial reaction of the media to this idea in the UK was extremely hostile. There were lots of jokes about the Monty Python routine, nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Right, I remember that.
And lots of people, we had a famous example in that book about the urinals in the Amsterdam airport where they etched the image of a fly near the place you're supposed to aim. And the claim was it reduced spillage, a great euphemism. It reduced spillage by 80%. I've never been able to get that data. But anyway, lots of people thought that this was about the most important problem that we would be able to tackle.
Yeah.
And, that team now has close to 100 people. There's a similar team in the White House, 50 other countries, the World Bank. For a book that nobody wanted to publish, and that we didn't think anybody would read. When we wrote the book, it's interesting. Whenever I write anything, an academic article or op-ed or a book, I try to have a couple real people in mind that I'm imagining I'm writing it for them.
Oh.
For academic articles, it's usually for my biggest critic. So, like my finance articles, I have my now golf buddy, Gene Fama, whose office is around the corner. I'd often think about him and say, all right, what's he going to say about this, and how can I preempt that?
Yeah.
So when we were writing this book, I told Cass I had this approach, and so we picked 2 people as our imaginary readers. One was David Brooks, the New York Times columnist. And we picked him because he was a thoughtful conservative. And we were trying to devise policies that would be attractive to conservatives as well as progressives. And said, okay, he would be one. The other was, we had this new senator in Illinois who was a former colleague of Cass, skinny black guy called Obama.
Oh, jeez.
And we thought, it'd be good if he read it, because he looks like an up-and-comer. And when we were writing the book, he was in the first year of his, in the Senate. So those are the two people. We thought if we got those two people to read the book, it would be a success. We did get those two people to read the book and some more.
And it was a success.
And it was a success.
I mean, it's such a success that it's now an approach. It's known as an orientation to decision making and choice, rather than just a collection of stories. Remarkable. I did. By the way, do David Brooks and Barack Obama know that they were over each of your shoulders as you wrote?
David knows, and Cass worked for the president the first 4 years of the administration, and they were friends. Obama used to be an adjunct professor at the law school here.
Yeah.
And he had an office somewhere near Cass's, and they were good friends, and that's why he took him to the White House. I don't know whether Cass ever told him that story.
Right. Fascinating, though. I do the same thing when I write even down to a particular paragraph. I will put over my shoulder an academic who's a specialist in that particular area that I'm writing about, and over my other shoulder, a neighbor, someone who is just interested in information about how we work as a species. And I don't allow myself to proceed to the next paragraph until I think I've satisfied both. And that's my green light. Now I'm finished and I can go on to the next.
Yeah, well, of course, the third person I had in mind is my wife, France, who you've met.
Yes.
And when we finished it, I was afraid to show any part of Nudge to France. But when we had a manuscript, I gave it to her, and she started reading it.
Yeah.
And we set aside a weekend where she had marked it up, and I can tell you, it was a brutal weekend. She says, first of all, you don't even define nudge, and it went from there. And the best set of comments we got on the book came from her, and it was painful. But in the back of my mind, and certainly when I was writing Misbehaving,
yeah,
I knew the day was going to come when I had to hand her this manuscript.
Yeah.
And she sets a high standard.
Right. Well, this has been a terrific set of answers to a set of questions I always thought I would like to be asked. So I appreciate that very much. It was very revealing, and I think there's some nuggets in here that no one has ever heard about, and I'm glad to be able to make them available to people. So thank you again, Richard.
It's a pleasure, as always, and I hope to see you in the flesh sometime soon.
I as well. So long for now.
Bye, Bob.
Bye.